Y'all ready?
Fish Stripes live, another off-season edition. My name is Isaac Azoud. Joined with the normal suspects, we have Eli Sussman, Daniel Rodriguez, and Alex Carver. So we're here 3 weeks into October. The Marlins, most of them are golfing or having kids and getting married. Meanwhile, we have the League Championship Series going on. Boston is playing Los Angeles. Game 4 is tonight. And we have Boston and Houston tied at 2 games apiece. Game 5 is being played as we speak. So I guess we can start with that. Daniel, I don't know how much of the playoffs you've watched so far, but it's been a hell of a 2 series so far. What has been your takeaway thus far?
I've been really surprised between the Braves and the Dodgers series, especially with the Braves going up 2-0. I thought that they might have just have the ability to sweep the Dodgers, and then everyone in baseball will be wrong about their pick on who makes it to the World Series. And they've just been doing it also without Acuna, which was really surprising to me how they're able to have this offense and even, stacking up their pitchers with, their best player out. It's just really shocking to me. And it's great for the NL East, at least. So it's really crazy to see the Braves really taking it to the Dodgers.
Yeah, no, it was a hell of a game last night. For those of you who missed it, the Braves were 6 outs away from taking a commanding 3-0 lead on the Dodgers, on the defending World Series champion Dodgers, and then Cody Bellinger happened. And after just a horrid year for the guy to come through in that spot, that's huge. Eli, what has stood out to you in the playoffs so far?
Yeah, well, you mentioned Bellinger. I mean, that's one particular guy. It's hard to overstate how shitty he was all year long for the Dodgers. I mean, he was coming off shoulder surgery, and I think he had a secondary injury during the year as well that missed a lot of time. So he had like a valid excuse, but he is a very recent MVP. He was the National League MVP in the most recent full-length season. He's still in his prime aging-wise, and yet performance-wise, I mean, you compare his slash line side by side with Sandy Leone, and there's a lot in common there. It's nobody would have expected that. He just was a terrible hitter like all year long. And then in the postseason, I think a stat I saw is that he has by far the highest hard hit rate in the playoffs. It's not just the results. It's not just that home run. It's that he seems to be back to being like a pretty close version of himself at a time where he's just 1 year away from free agency. There's been a lot of crazy thoughts going through my head about what a trade scenario would look like for him this offseason, because if they can't trust him to be good, and they're a team that always has these World Series aspirations, and he's coming off this injury, then like they would have had some very difficult decisions to make if he hadn't shown this like flash of his former self over these last few weeks. So like that alone, I talked about this on the podcast briefly that I had that came out this morning, is that Dodger fans are they're in a really nice place. They've been spoiled year after year after year. And we'll see how this turns out. I would lean towards them somehow making it through the series and going to the World Series, which would be the 4th time in the last 5 years. It's kind of the closest thing we have to a modern dynasty in baseball right now.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. They're almost the Golden State Warriors of the major leagues, and I think definitely Bellinger this postseason, even in the Giants series, he's really just added to his value. Alex, I'll ask you the same question. This whole postseason, wild card, division series, championship series, what has stood out to you the most?
I mean, if you want to get one name, I'll give you Kiki Hernandez. I mean, that guy's a glorified utility player, and he was with the Marlins for a little while. They traded him. I think he was on the Marlins twice, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, a glorified utility guy, and going off in the postseason and making a name for himself. That's a guy that pretty much came up at the same way, like I said, as the utility kind of guy. Maybe a guy that you can liken to, it's a bad name these days, but Bryson Brigman, like that same kind of player, like just that same kind of like utility action type player. So, but that's cool to see him going off. And then you have, if you want to get to another single name, I guess Yordan Alvarez is another like younger player who's making a name for himself for the Astros. So, man, it's been exciting. And as I said the last time I saw you guys, it's great to see good baseball because we lived through a lot of bad baseball, but it's good to see entertaining baseball. And that's what the postseason's about, man. These big moments, the big homers, the big pitching performances. I'm sure we'll get to maybe one of those here. I think you guys want to talk about. We'll talk about it later. But it's been fun, and I'm having a joy watching it, man. I'm kind of in between that and Arizona Fall League and doing what I have to do there. But it's been really fun to watch all these guys ball out, and these emerging performers are really cool. These younger players for me.
Yeah, no, something that Ethan Badowski said, I don't know if you guys know who that is. He was mentioning like just a huge gap of talent between, these teams that we're watching right now and the Miami Marlins. The Marlins have just so much work they're going to have to do, mainly offensively. They want to compete with any of these teams. You just look at Boston, you look at Houston, you look at LA. They have an astounding amount of offensive players. And you mentioned Kike. He's not the only former Marlin that's playing in these playoffs. You have Kiki Hernandez, Nathan Eovaldi both on Boston, Ryan Stanek, Yimi Garcia both on Houston, Adam Duvall on Atlanta, and Austin Barnes and Alex Vezio on the Dodgers. So I'm just like curious, Eli. I'm not going to say that the Marlins are the farm system for all these great teams, but just is there a pattern as to why? And even in the wild card team, John Carl's on the Yankees, and there's other players that are on these teams. Why are there so many former Marlins playing in postseason right now?
The pattern is that the Marlins just get rid of a lot of guys. They are allergic to continuity with a few exceptions. They, one way or the other, whether it's they're low on someone and get rid of them, or whether they just make some other poor decision. It's not always a mistake that they made that turns out this way. They've churned through so many different players, and I guess part of that is just being a relatively small market team. Is that when players start to you forecast them to earn a certain amount of money, and you like make that calculation way in advance that you don't think you're going to be wanting to play them and build a cohesive roster around them, and you get rid of them that way. I think, yeah, you could like go into the details with each specific guy. It's a little bit different. On the whole, this is just something I notice every single postseason, and it's just because of the constant activity. It's always trades. And it's not always about mistakes, but the one constant is just there's always some reason why they churn players at all these different positions. And I guess if you want to point to this exact moment in time, we're now almost 4 years removed from the ownership change. And as Alex has mentioned a bunch of times, even on the stream, the specific pattern of guys connected to the old regime being more expendable than some of the other guys. So anybody that even was really qualified on their merits, someone that seemed on paper to make a lot of sense in this organization, some of those, if they had arrived before a certain date, they're more expendable than you'd otherwise be. And a lot of these moves were made for the sake of bringing in their own guys, bringing in players that that check certain boxes that this new regime has that the old one didn't have. And some for better, some for worse. It's just a different eye in looking at players.
Yeah, no, Daniel, one of those guys that Alex mentioned is Kike Hernandez. And a lot of these guys that are playing right now, they seem to have just been, like role players, utility guys that the Marlins valued well when they traded for them, and then they just got rid of them really quickly. And this is all the old regime. Daniel, of all these former Marlins, of any of those trades, which one would you like to have back?
I think I would go with Adam Duvall, seemingly just because of what we got in return. And getting in return Alex Jackson now, he's performed. He's probably or definitely not the guy of the future. I don't see him starting for the Marlins for the next decade or so. And to have a guy like Adam Duvall can hit home runs, bring in runs, and that's what the Marlins desperately need. And I'm still dumbfounded on why even make that trade. It's probably just for money and everything, but it's not like you're paying Adam Duvall $20 million every year. They can afford to have a guy like that who can hit home runs, RBIs, be a leader in the clubhouse, which is also really important, especially for a young team like Miami. And that one hurts the most. Seeing him, now in the NLCS. Could make the World Series. Looks like they might be able to. And then, you see that happen. And then you notice maybe over the summer he was just, matching home runs against the Cubs for Miami. I wish we could have Duvall back. I miss him. He's such a great player and an even better person.
Yeah, no, I actually tweeted that out, that if Duvall, becomes a free agent again this offseason, he is someone that we have, the Marlins have to consider bringing back. Alex, I'll relay the same question over to you. Of all those guys that are playing the postseason right now in the LCS, who would you like to have back?
Yeah, I guess I got to agree with Daniel that the most recent one's got to be Duvall. That's a guy that you wish you had, especially with an opening pretty much here in the outfield. Pretty clear opening, maybe not with what De La Cruz is doing. I guess I should say he could be a candidate to win that spot, but behind him, there ain't much. So, yeah, a guy that hits home runs, was playing great defense, a guy that I definitely thought that could have stuck around If not for a longer term, definitely for at least like a 2-year deal, maybe you could have got that done. And you give him up for Jackson, who unfortunately has not worked out. So that's the main one. There are other ones for sure that I'm sure we'll talk about, but that's the main one for sure for me. Marte, you could say Marte too, but with Marte, it's a little trickier with the length of contract that he wanted versus what the Marlins were willing to give out. So that one's a little trickier. Yes, you would have loved to have Marte still on the team. I think he's one of the better players in baseball, but with what the Marlins are trying to do with the prospects and the length that he wanted, that wasn't really a reality, and it didn't happen. So in the realistic sense, as Daniel said, it's Duvall for me as the main one, but there's others for sure.
Alex Jackson, for those wondering, he finished 2021 combined with Atlanta and Miami, hitting 137 with an OPS of 488. He struck out 49% of his at-bats. So that is definitely a trade I think we all would agree we'd like to have back. But moving on to another polarizing name that just, takes up so much of our group chat time is Alex Vezio.
Yeah.
Alex Vezio he was traded to Los Angeles along with Kyle Hurt for Dylan Floro, who was a big part of the Marlins bullpen in 2021. Some of us think it was a trade that, whatever. It was a normal trade. We got to give talent to give it back, to get talent, and you have to give it back. And, Alex, I want you to start with this one because I think you really regret that trade, and I can see your point for sure.
No, you guys are all right. Eli is right. Ethan is right. Isaac, you've been right in everything that you said about this particular subject. You do have to give up talent to get talent. And where the Marlins were with this trade is that they wanted to reconstruct the bullpen, not just from the closing perspective, but from the perspective of the entire thing. And they needed it for sure. And with Dylan Floro, you got back a guy who was very good. There's no getting around it. The guy was good. He had like a sub-3 ERA. He was in there like 7th, 8th inning most of the time. And most of the time he was pretty much shut down. He had his moments, but other than that, he was good. That World Series experience, you love that. He's a veteran guy. I liked him. I have no problem with the return. What I have a problem with personally is the price tag. And you have to look at, with me personally, I look at it. You're dealing with the Los Angeles Dodgers, a team that's there every single year. If they're targeting Alex Vezio and Kyle Hurt, they're doing it for a reason because they know what those guys have. You're seeing what Vezio has right now. Kyle Hurt's a different story. He came out of the 2020 draft, a great draft for the Marlins that brought back the likes of what we know. And maybe Hurt was another piece. Maybe not. Maybe he was a little bit lesser. Maybe it's not really a starter ceiling. Maybe it's more of a bullpen ceiling. I can see both sides. I have to see more from him to really give you that perspective. I haven't really seen it. But the videos and stuff that I've seen from him, it's a guy that the Marlins, I don't think, should have given up on before seeing him throw a single inning. So it's a tough topic for me, man, because I do see your guys' point of view that Floro provides a service, and he definitely does. But I think Alex Vezio has shut down closer ceiling, hands down, bar none. That guy was up to 95 with the Marlins. His changeup was his best secondary pitch, and he also had a slider on top of it. You're seeing all three pitches right now. It's a good pitcher, man, and that's a guy that could close games. And if he was still here, and I brought this up to you, Isaac, if he was on the Marlins in 2021, he would have been closing games over the likes of the struggling Anthony Bass and Anthony Bender and whoever else the Marlins tried to throw out, Yimmy, everybody else that the Marlins tried to throw out there. We've talked about a bunch of these names. I mean, I think he has a big future, and I love that he plays with such passion. It's an awesome player. I really like that guy. And again, for the Dodgers to target those guys, I mean, that says a lot. I mean, that's a team that's there, and they know exactly what they're doing, and you see it happening. So it's a tough topic. Is it the worst trade in the world? No. Is it the trade that I think that the Marlins will look back on eventually and say they lost it? Absolutely. And that's my only point on it.
80 grade makeup on Alex Vezio, an awesome human being, super late draft pick out of a Division II school. It was, and he wasn't even all that effective when he was pitching in D2. It was so much fun to like follow his journey of the minor league ranks. What makes it painful now is that obviously how he's performing right now, he seems to be, it's hard to, I think there was a lot of agreement that he had this kind of potential, but there's always a question of whether you reach that potential and also when you reach that potential. The fact that he is reaching this potential in his first full major league season, it's uncommon. It's a little more common for relievers than other positions, but it's still uncommon overall. It was not something that the Marlins could have ever banked on happening. If you really want to dive into it, it hasn't even been like an amazing season. It's been an amazing half season. He was called up early in the year. he couldn't throw strikes. I checked it up. He was throwing 50% strikes in May and I believe early June. Like, it's unplayable somehow because of the qualities of his fastball, that spin rate and also that location. Like, he's there's no tricks. He's going to throw you high fastball after high fastball after high fastball, and it's really hard to hit, and that's what makes him really special. So he was avoiding big damage early in the year, but his location was terrible. And after a quick, drop down to AAA, he fine-tuned that, and he was able to, over these last like 3.5 months, he's been much more in sync with all that. I just caution people that relievers, even the good ones, with very few exceptions, this stuff, it doesn't last on its own. He'll need to make adjustments. It's still a big question to me. He put up an ERA in the mid 2s this year. His whip was in the low 1s. Like, I think it's fair to go under the presumption that this might be the best that he ever is in the major leagues. It's not clear that he'll just continue to get better and better despite all the positives about him. Relief pitching is just that tricky. I mean, we felt another version of this with someone like Nick Anderson, where he was on top of the world in late 2019 and early 2020, and now his career's at a total crossroads because of one injury, and you never know how someone comes back from that. So the most important thing for him is going to be to stay healthy. With Vezio, the bottom line is that they felt, I think pretty accurately, that he was in this box as a reliever, that there was really no scenario where he ends up giving you more than 65, 70 innings a year in the regular season, plus more in the postseason. But if you're going to be in that small of a role, and to that point when they made the deal, he had no positive track record in the majors and very little track record whatsoever, that I thought it was a fair gamble for someone in Dylan Floro, who at the time I likened to a better version of Brandon Kinsler. They decided that they didn't want to bring back Kinsler. Floro was cheaper salary-wise. He had more control, and they felt that he was just a better version of him, that he had a similar type of sinker and changeup that tunneled off of that, and he would get that similar kind of contact. He would keep the ball in the ballpark, and they got exactly what they were expecting. He wasn't perfect, but he was exactly as advertised. Miscast in the closer's role, but still arguably their most valuable reliever over the course of the season. You know how much I love Anthony Bender, but I'd make the case that Floro was the number one reliever they had from start to finish overall. And that's not for nothing, even though ultimately it didn't make the difference. The good news is that they still have club control over Floro for 2 more years, which is why I'll be very curious to revisit this in a couple of years. And maybe by then I'll be where you are, like seeing this as a clear loss for the Marlins at the time, and like a mistake. But I'm not there yet. It's a fascinating one though. It is definitely, who was it? I think it was just Kevin Burrell that like very flatly said, it was good for both sides. It was a win-win. And I think as simplified as that is, I think it worked out well so far, even though the jury is still out on how this plays out the next couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, with this trade and like most trades, you're trading 2 guys who you hope will be, as established as Dylan Floro. So I think that's just, you're trading the gamble. And I think the only situation where this trade really hurts, no pun intended, is if it hurt, like really, becomes something. I think that's when it maybe stings a little bit. Daniel, what are your thoughts?
I mean, I'm kind of with Eli. Like, I kind of see it as a win-win. I mean, Dylan Floro played pretty great. I don't say great, but he played good for the Marlins. And seeing what Alex Vezio is doing, I mean, that part kind of hurts. Like, I kind of want to see what when eventually he's a free agent, what his market value will be in the open market. Like, do you see him as someone that can get maybe a big contract, maybe around $4 million, or is he always going to be someone that's probably around the million range, or just getting maybe a minor league deal or something like that?
Yeah, it's a doozy, this trade. And hey, I think Eli said it best that in a couple of years we'll have a much better picture on who are the winners and who are the losers on this trade.
Yeah, I mean, just to finish off, because we saw that one tweet with Hurt showing his stuff, and it had the metrics about his spin rate and his stuff. And Alex goes, I think that set you off, Alex, just seeing like one tweet like highlighting what he'd done early in the season. Hurt was doing nothing. He was on the IL in the minors for most of the year, and then he was struggling initially, and we didn't pay any attention to it. And then it's like, oh, it's coming together. So yeah, it's step by step. Even a month from now, after the Arizona Fall League, because that's where Hurt is in the Fall League, right? So a few more outings over there. If he's nasty every single time, then maybe we get a little bit worried. At this particular moment, the jury is still out.
It's not just that. It wasn't really just that. I mean, yes, that added to my frustration for sure. But no, I mean, I saw Vezio coming up, man, and like I said, I saw the velo already up to 95, and like you said, this is a late round pick, and I understand it from the business side. The Marlins did not have a lot invested in Alex Vezio as an 18th round pick, you know, a nowhere college pretty much. I think JUCO, and I'm pretty sure. So yeah, I mean, there's not a lot invested in him, but I mean, just from the standpoint of what he did in the minors with his 30 inning scoreless streak between the minors and spring training. I mean, he was showing good. Velo was already good. I thought his changeup was already good, really, really good. He said himself that he thinks that's his best pitch. So I'm not trying to drag it out, but I mean, if Hurt's performing on top of that, and Kyle Hurt was hurt in the physical sense for most of the minor league season. So, I mean, if Kyle Hurt turns into something, it's a definite loss. I think it will eventually be a definite loss in the long term. In the short term, you guys are right. You know, Flora provided a service, and if he's here for the next 2 years out of the middle of the bullpen, that's great. So, I mean, it's not, like, again, not the worst trade ever, but it does hurt a little bit for me personally.
You know, something I was going to mention, Alex, is that if the Marlins did make the postseason and Flora was saving games or, you know, pitching high leverage situation innings for the Marlins in a National League Division Series, would you have a different take on this? I don't even think we'd be considering it a loss in the future or now.
Yeah, I mean, you have to go through a lot of hypotheticals to get to that situation, but you know, again, I personally like Dylan Flora. I think he's a good pitcher. I think he's actually really good. I don't think he is a bona fide closer. I think he got forced into that role because of all of the struggles the Marlins had in that role throughout the course of the season. I think personally, and Eli and you guys can all disagree with me, that Vezio has much closer to that ceiling than Dylan Floro will ever have. And that's an opinion, and you guys can agree or disagree with me. But, I mean, honestly, I see a lot in that guy, and I think that, you know, the Marlins got him for not a big signing bonus. It's a guy that they could have turned into that classic Marlins guy that they pluck out of nowhere and turn into a star. And they've done it before, albeit to trade a lot of them away. But, you know, they've done it before. And I definitely think that was a guy that could have provided a lot more in terms of, you know, the higher leverage ceiling out of the bullpen than Dylan Floro, even though I'm not knocking Dylan Floro. I do like him, and I hope he sticks around these next 2 years because I think he's good. But again, it hurts a little bit for me.
What I'll admit to is there were moments during the season I never actually put my thoughts out there completely about just the stylistic differences in the fact that Vezio misses bats, and when he hits bats, it's mostly like pop-ups. And Floro, he allows ground balls and soft line drives, some stuff that you can control with a good defense, and other stuff that, you know, over time is going to come back and bite you. And one of those moments that people most remember, they blame it on Jorge Alfaro, that walk-off against the Mets when the Marlins blew, a 5-1 lead in the ninth inning. And ultimately, the ball was hit to Jorge Alfaro in left field, and he was the one that misplayed it and ended up leading to the winning run. The pitcher on the mound at that time was Floro, and he allowed, I think, a couple hits in that inning, just needing one more out to get out of it. He was throwing quality pitches and they were getting fouled off, and eventually he got, the soft contact he wanted, but it went to the wrong spot and it made it through. And those are the things that separate a shutdown closer from somebody like Floro. He does have that ceiling where he's not going to totally shut you down because he doesn't get much out of his breaking ball, and he's not going to miss bats a ton. So because of that, that's why the Marlins as a team, just to spin this forward, that's something that should be a priority this offseason, to get more guys with that whiff ability. That Bender has a lot of it, but even somebody hopefully that's more established than that, those are the guys worth investing in, either via trade or with a significant free agent deal, the ones that miss bats in a variety of ways. It makes them those are the ones you need to trust in the most important situations. Floro can be trusted in a lot of situations. If he's the closer of the team next year, I could make a prediction without any other information that they'll probably have a losing record if he's the guy that's their closer from start to finish next year. You need to aim a little higher.
Yeah, if you're going to get a guy like Dylan Floro, I think you need to pair him with a great defense, and not with the defense that the Marlins had this season, in which they led Major League Baseball in errors. So I think that also probably had a big part to it. Anyway, speaking of floor and the Dodgers, Miguel Rojas went on the Chris Rose show, and we got some bits of news in that interview with him. First off is that it looks like an extension is coming near. It looks like in the 2-year range. The money we don't know yet. Daniel Rojas has been the non-official captain the last few years. He's been performing really well. How do you feel if he's going to be over the foreseeable future, either starting or in a utility role? What are your thoughts?
I think giving him a 2-year deal is perfect. That's what you want to give someone like that who's aging a little bit, but you don't want to give him like a 5-year deal, 4-year deal. 2-year deal is perfect. I would say probably somewhere maybe 15, maybe anywhere 14 to $16 million range. He's earned at least a decent sized contract. 2 years isn't really going to hurt the Marlins for the long run. And I think he could provide, spot starting, definitely a leader in the clubhouse, which, the Marlins have been desperately needing. And I think having someone like Rojas in, he could come in sometimes, but I think that's a really great negotiation for the Marlins, bringing him in for 2 years. Hopefully they get it done because, the Marlins don't really like spending money. And hopefully they do for someone like Miggy because he brings a lot to the community, to the fans, and also the other players around him. I think he's the perfect player the Marlins are bringing back. And I'm happy if it goes through.
Yeah, I got the clip right here. Let me play it real quick and then grab my dinner for a second.
We're talking. I'm happy. I'm happy that they approached me the same way that I was thinking early in the year in spring training, and then during the year, I always wanted to be here in Miami, and I want to continue to be here and be part of this organization when we actually take that step towards the part that we want to be, which is a winning team, winning franchise. So I've been here for the up and downs, a lot of downs, but I want to be here for the ups too. So
great.
We're getting really close, and I'm happy to share that with you guys.
Yeah, I think just having the continuity of him, just not only on the field, because who knows what his role will be in the next couple of years, but just having the continuity in the clubhouse, I think it speaks volumes. The more news that we got is that his quote that we didn't see in that clip is that regarding the front office, they're going all in. They're going to spend. They're going to try to bring the best free agents that they can to make this team better. Eli, what does that mean? And with Marlins financial constraints, what could we realistically expect?
Well, I guess it means that maybe he was a little unbiased in that statement, knowing that he had this deal that was coming together. Well, they're going to pay me, so I won't be the only one. Maybe he saw that as evidence that maybe something is turning a new leaf. I mean, by default, they're going to spend a lot of money this offseason because they barely have any money on the books. Like the only firm money on the books at this moment are Miggy and Anthony Bass. And that's it. Everything else, they have a big arbitration class coming up that will eat up at most probably like 20 something $million, depending on who they tender. Pablo and Sandy and Garrett Cooper and Aguilar, like all these guys are going to get pay raises that are significant, but there's also some easy non-tender decisions in there. Yeah, if they keep everything the status quo, the highest paid player next year would be Aguilar at like $7.5–8 million, the highest paid player on the whole team. So, and especially on the pitching staff, I mean, the highest paid pitcher would be probably Sandy, based on what he's going to make in his first year of arbitration. They have so much room to add. Even when you like just running it back with all the guys they have under control, you're looking at probably $45 million in commitments. This past year, they spent $60 million. And the years before that, they were significantly higher than that. I mean, when they took over the team in 2018, it was close to $100 million, just based on some of the contracts they had to inherit and they couldn't do anything with. So there's the track record of them. As much as they really burned everything to the ground that first offseason, they were still stuck with, close to $100 million in commitments. Like that's something, especially with the new TV deal and the naming rights and the continued general growth of baseball. I mean, we know they have that capacity to spend more than double, the money that they're already inheriting. With that being said, I think there's going to be a line drawn somewhere. Where that is, we don't really know. I mean, in previous off seasons, there were, I guess, rumors about some arbitrary threshold that they were going to spend up to, or compare to another team. And there really hasn't been anything on that. We don't know exactly where the ceiling is. But I think it's hard for me to imagine them topping that number that they had back in 2018, which was, high $90s million. So it's going to be a limit, but there's so much they could do because it's free agency, but it's also all this farm system depth that they have, especially on the pitching side. They have more arms than they know what to do with. If most of these guys are healthy right now, there are inevitably going to be trades for players that are already on efficient contracts on other teams. Any way you slice it, there's a lot of possibilities. I think just the one thing that we can rule out is they're not going to commit too much to any individual player. I think all those guys, those prized shortstops that we know are coming up on free agency, is hard to imagine them taking the plunge for any of those guys. And aside from that, you don't really want to rule anybody out. There's a lot of options, just a tier below that, starting with names like Nick Castellanos, who a lot of people have touched around, and Craig Mish is pretty convinced that that's one particular target they're going after. And he's going to be $20+ million a year. So if that's somebody that they're already thinking about, then I think all things considered, it's a slightly refreshing mindset that they're looking at a pretty wide open net of possibilities.
Yeah, no, we definitely heard these things before, the last 4 years, but it just really has never come to fruition. And, you mentioned that 2018 payroll. I think Wei and Chen must have been responsible for at least like 20% of it. So
yeah, Chen and Martin Prado, Brad Ziegler was still in the last year of his deal. There's some others in there that were yikes.
Yeah, those were just horrible. But going back to the Miguel Rojas thing really quick, Alex, if let's say in 2 years and when the Marlins are really actually competitive, is he the starting shortstop? Or do they bring in another infielder, whether it's at third, whether Jazz is at short, and someone else is at second? Can he be the starting infielder on a playoff contending team?
I honestly think that he could. If you look at what the Marlins have, in the short term, this is, at the, even the single A advanced level, the double A level, and the triple A level, there's not a ton of guys that you can point to and say, okay, that's going to be a starting shortstop. There are guys in the lower levels being, this is talking in-house, of course. This is the lower levels, FCL, single A, DSL. There's guys down there that you could point to and say, okay, that guy could definitely be a starting shortstop. But in the shorter term, man, a 2-year deal, as Daniel said, is great for Miggy. If the Marlins are contentious in those 2 years, that remains to be seen, of course, depending on what else they do. I think he could definitely be the starting shortstop because that's a guy that goes out there. He provides 100+ games pretty much every year. He had the finger issue this year. He had a couple other issues, but he was pretty damn effective to me. Over 260, I think the batting average, popped a couple homers, doesn't strike out a lot, provides what he does in the dugout, provides what he does through the rest of the organization, which we have talked about many times, which that's my biggest thing with Miggy is that he's a leader, not only for the Marlins, but for the entire rest of the organization. That's a guy that you don't see a lot of guys around baseball like that. Maybe he's not the greatest, he's not going to be a Hall of Famer. I don't think any of us think that, but man, in terms of what he provides overall to an organization, that guy is special. I love him. I would definitely welcome him back on a 2-year deal. And if the Marlins are contentious in that time frame and he's the starting shortstop, and God willing, they get far in the playoffs, he deserves every bit of that because he's put in his work, both mentally and physically. He's gone through a lot of crap, but man, he's awesome. And I definitely, to answer your question, could see him being the starting shortstop within the next 2 or possibly even 3 years. If he lasts that long, and if the Marlins bring him back after this 2-year deal that's being talked about, definitely could happen because, unless they sign a free agent, there's not a lot behind him in-house right now. So yeah, I definitely think so.
You got that
right.
And
I mentioned this on a recent podcast as well, that even though I agree with you that there is a certain roster they could build around him, where if he's even the everyday shortstop, that you could still be a contending team if you get the other decisions right. But this doesn't mean they should be complacent about not looking for creative ways to address shortstop, because even in the most generous interpretation, there is a difference between him and an all-star caliber guy. And I think most importantly, you just know that he has this willingness and this ability to accommodate his teammates. He could play those other infield positions. He's done it before, hundreds of innings at second base and almost as much at third base. Like he's had these reps. He has this background as coming out of nowhere to be a major league player, that he doesn't have that same kind of ego that other guys would have at this stage of their career after having as much major league time as he's had. Like if they find there is another more conventional shortstop out there that has a higher ceiling, and I guess the main key would be somebody that's younger, because it's very unusual for guys to stick at shortstop pretty deep into their 30s on an everyday basis. Like, this is not an excuse for complacency. This doesn't mean they should rule out any other opportunities to upgrade, because Miggy can work around that. He's going to help this team win games no matter what particular role he's in.
Yeah, no, I think Craig said it best in 2019 when he signed that first 2-year extension, that, it's not franchise altering. It's more, career altering career changing for Miguel Rojas and his family. And I think the same goes here. I was talking about it with Christina today at the park, and the harsh reality is there are 20 other shortstops in Major League Baseball that are better than him. We're going to be honest. But yeah, I definitely agree with you, Alex, that just the off-field stuff is worth having him around. The continuity, it's what this team needs, and it's what this team has really lacked since the regime change. There really hasn't been that one guy that's been here the whole time. Urania was sort of there for a while, but other than that, Miguel Rojas and Derek Jeter seems to really have like a favoritism towards a shortstop. Now,
yeah, well, I mean, we could talk about it just to bring it up really quick. I mean, what Eli said is true. He could do all the stuff off the field, but that I think is amazing that, you don't, like I said, you don't see it in a lot of other players. But what it comes down to when you're building a winning team is it comes down to on-field performance. And as you said, Isaac, there are better players for sure. But Eli said it as well. The Carlos Correas, like that's something that's just not going to happen. The Marlins aren't going to do that. I mean, we could pray that it will happen. It's not going to happen. At least I 90% don't think so. And if I'm proven wrong, then great. But I don't think I will be. Anyways, there's other ways to go, whether it be the Rule 5 draft or the Browns have done before, or, other places to go in free agency to look for a starting shortstop. And yes, I mean, this is a guy that's coming up on the end of his career, but I'm just saying my point was that if they don't do anything and they have to live through Miguel Rojas being the starting shortstop, it's possible to still have a winning team. And that's the point. So, yeah, I mean, there's routes to go. There's other ways that they can go. But if he's the starting shortstop for the next 2 years, I have no problem with it.
Yeah, I agree. I think he brings a lot of value in so many different ways that, if he is just in the lineup hitting eighth for you, I think you're going to have a successful ball club. Something that Daniel mentioned to me that I slipped my mind was that there was a big announcement in Major League Baseball was that all teams will now be providing housing for minor league players. For actually, in the release, it said certain players, but all minor league teams will be providing housing. So, Daniel, I want to get your thoughts on that. Long overdue, in my opinion. But hey, it's finally here.
I'm just surprised that it took even this long, especially with all the money in Major League Baseball, all these owners, and it's kind of, I mentioned this on the small pod, how they kind of see these minor league players as toys, as like little commodities that they have, just as warm bodies for the minor league teams. And, not even getting housing. I saw a picture that kind of went viral of Tom Kohler, and he mentioned his first minor league apartment, and it's just maybe 5 guys on the floor, bags everywhere, clothes. It looked disgusting, honestly. And it took him this long, and starting in 2022. I'm happy that I finally got it, because these players deserve it. They're professional athletes who deserve to be, paid like such and treated as such. And then, they're treated like just trash. It's good to see that they finally get housing. One step forward, a win for minor league baseball and a win for players.
The argument that I hear the other way, specifically from former president David Sampson, is that, 60-70% of those players in the minor leagues, they're just stockings. They're not going to be major league players. They're not prospects whatsoever. So his argument is, so what? And I personally disagree, because, hey, they're like following their dream. They're playing professional baseball. They should have some more than $1,200 a week or a month or whatever it is. It's nothing. They all need to get other jobs in the offseason. I think the least you could do is provide some minimal housing for them. And Alex, I know you have a strong relationship with a lot of these minor league guys. I'm sure this is like about time, right?
Yeah, no, for sure. And, I talked about it in length on the website, and I'm sure you guys saw it. And you guys have talked about it as well in length. I know Eli did as well, that this is something that is, it was something that was an issue already, and it was only compounded because, especially in the lower levels of minor league baseball, there used to be what's called host families. And the host families would be these people that would just live in the certain areas that would just say, hey, we'll let that guy stay in our den, or we'll let that guy stay in our basement, whatever it may be. I know it was really big in Batavia, New York, when the Marlins were up there with short season. And that was great. But now, of course, with COVID and everything else, that wasn't a thing. And then another thing that compounded it, and I'm not making it political, but another thing that compounded it was the eviction moratorium, where in every single state, nobody could be evicted. So in these places that were surrounding ballparks that maybe there would have been affordable housing, there's people that are just sitting there. So there's no space available. That's the point, right? So, and some of these guys, especially the international guys, they don't even have a vehicle. They can't even drive to the park. They're at a loss. They have nowhere to go except for to try to find a couch to sleep on, or hope they can find 6 other guys to share the wage for a hotel for one night, and then you got to figure out a whole month. So it was a bad situation. And, it's a credit to people like advocates for minor league baseball. And there are others as well, but they're a huge one that did so much great work and really pressuring the league to do this. And that's what was needed is, hey, these guys need help, and they really, really needed help. There's been so many players that retired that were good talents that retired for this exact situation, that they just weren't living like a human being. So, outside of whatever David Sampson said, and I completely disagree as well. These are human beings, and they're working a job. They're doing a job, and they're showing up every day, and they're expected to be in prime physical condition. But how can you be if you're in that living situation? So it's something that I've been really passionate about. I'm definitely glad that there is some kind of closure on it. I'm really, really grateful when that announcement came out. That was huge.
Yeah, to me, that's just a slam dunk. How has it not been done already in the last 10 years? Where you've seen, I know exactly, a lot of minor leaguers have retired because, hey, I can't afford it. I can't afford to play anymore. I actually went to school with a couple of guys that were there, and they couldn't keep playing anymore. Eli, was this a breath of fresh air or what?
Yeah. When Alex mentioned the host families, I was thinking very vividly about this guy in Clinton in 2019, Tony Byers. And it was a lot of fun to follow him chronicling being a host for among others, Humberto Mejia, who has since made it to the major leagues. For I think Christopher Torres was also one of his guys that year, and apparently he'd been doing it year after year after year. And it was pretty heartwarming, both what he did as a host parent and also the relationships he kept with those players afterwards. There's a really interesting dynamic there about that. With that being said, the fact that we used to rely so much on that system for a lot of these affiliates, especially at the lower levels, it's baffling that it made it this far into the year, just because, that feeling as a player, they're young men, but they're also adults at this point. And for them to either be living in really uncomfortable positions or to be living with host families that have different philosophies, have different rules, have different tastes than they do, and having really no other affordable option, not being able to afford alternatives outside of that, it works for some guys and they make great memories from that. But for others, it's just not a professional environment. And if you want to groom these guys to be ready to be fully functional adults on and off the field once it reaches the majors, you want to allow them to grow in all the ways that they can by living in reasonable situations on their way up the ladder. So very, very long overdue, by decades, probably. It's incredible. And the main takeaway from this is that the work is not done. The next step is also to address the salaries that the players make, even if you are going to handle their housing. And no doubt that puts them in a better financial position. The fact is, the salaries they still make during the season are, in most cases, less than $2,000 a month. And it would qualify as being below the poverty line based on the salaries that they make during the season. So for all the hours that they're putting in, essentially almost 24/7, you're a baseball player between April and September. That needs to be addressed too eventually. Hopefully immediately, as soon as possible, to let those guys get up to a situation where that they're making it's just laughable that those guys still, for all the hours they put in, to be treated like seasonal workers is just unacceptable.
Yeah,
there was
another guys also live in expensive cities. Also, it's just crazy. Some guys, I think Class A, they mentioned there, Brooklyn, San Jose, and it's really hard to just live in those expensive cities just on a regular salary, and then you're talking about $2,000 a month, and that's just crazy to think of. You were saying, Alex?
Yeah, no, I was just going to bring up, because Eli brought up the host family situation with Byers and Clinton. Another really cool one from Clinton as well, before they were a Marlins affiliate, was Pablo Lopez. And Pablo Lopez was part of a host family situation with the Lumber Kings while they were a Mariners affiliate. And if I'm not mistaken, his host family that housed him there was actually out at spring training a lot, and I'm pretty sure was at his first major league start. So that system was really cool. I hope someday they bring that back. I mean, I guess now they don't really need it because they're going to be funded for housing. But it was a cool system, and those families built relationships with those players that lasted pretty much a long time. So it was cool, and to see it go away only compounded the situation. But yeah, I mean, a lot of these players, we talk about it all the time, and we talked about a lot of these players, or some of these players at least, in spring training, like Will Stewart. They get paid only for the season, and they get paid what they get paid, which isn't a lot, as Eli alluded to. And then they have to go and get off-season jobs. Like Will Stewart worked in a hospital. You hear about some of these guys that go work at electronic stores, car dealerships. So, most baseball players spend their off-season recuperating and getting in shape and all that other stuff. And these guys still have to go make money. So the wage thing is definitely the next step, as Eli alluded to. These guys got to support families. We know a lot of these guys have wives and kids, and they have families to support, and they definitely deserve a big wage increase. And I'm sure that's the next step for those groups that I mentioned. So hopefully that can get done next, but big step for sure, as we mentioned here.
Yeah, ginormous step. And Eli mentioned it. It's from April to September. A lot of them, it's from February to September. They're playing a whole, 7, 8 almost months where you're making nothing, and it's almost impossible to live off that. Anyway, really quick, since we're talking about minor leagues, Alex, a quick Arizona Fall League update, if you can.
Yeah, it's been interesting so far. I follow the box scores and whatever we get on Twitter from people that are there. Unfortunately, these games aren't televised, so I can't give you a with my eyes, I guess, recuperation of everything. But no, it's been interesting so far.
I think that needs to change. I think
agreed.
More.
Agreed. Yeah, definitely. You're right. I think there should be more exposure for Arizona Fall League, but it is what it is. But no, it's been good so far. Most Marlins players, this last game, Marlins players, I think only Evan Fitterer and Justin Evans were the only two players that got into the game, and they were, of course, pitchers. So no position players for the Marlins, which is mostly what they have there. But yeah, no, it's been good so far. I've liked what I've seen, the continuation from guys like Johnston and Cam Meisner that are going up against these upper level guys. Some of them played against the upper level guys during the season. Johnston really didn't, so it's cool to see that they're able to continue their success against these upper level guys and top tier prospects is really cool. Little bit of everything, I guess you could say, from guys like Jeffrey Yan, who was wild a little bit during the season. He's been little wild now, but he's still racking up some strikeouts. Fitterer, that's a younger guy pitching against upper level competition, and he's doing pretty well. I mean, not fantastic, but I mean, man, he's living up to it. And doing okay. So he pitched today and did okay. So it's just a time for growth. It's a time to get more reps and a time to show, that you're ready, for the next step. And, it's not really results related. It's just how they handle it and the adjustments that they make going into next season. So I think most of these guys are doing pretty well, and it's fun to follow for sure. I have a blast following this stuff and just diving deeper into it and doing whatever we can to cover it. I'm sure Eli's right with me. So no, it's been fun.
Yeah, it's entertaining stuff. And something I wanted to ask Daniel and Eli was, besides Blade, besides Meisner, and besides Fitterer, which of those 5 other guys, that are in Arizona would you be highest on? And maybe besides Jeffrey Yan too, because that's like an interesting player. But
just eliminate half the guys.
Right, exactly.
I think that leaves us with Banfield.
The bottom 4 guys, who are Troy Johnson, Will Banfield, Justin Evans, and Josh Simpson. Of those 4, you got who? Daniel, I'll start with you. Who do you be highest on?
I think Banfield. I think I'd be highest on Banfield, especially in that catcher position, something that the Marlins have been just extremely desperate for. I would like to see him, and just solely on that position alone, I would probably be on the Banfield train.
Well, if I'm allowed to pick Johnston, if Troy Johnston falls outside that elite group, then I'd probably lean towards him over Banfield, even though they're really like polar opposites of each other, because with Troy, his bat is a joy to watch. Both his bat and his whole plate approach. I mean, everything he does at the plate is great, and it's something that I know Alex feels the same way, that he's easily one of the top 30 prospects in the whole organization based on what he showed this year. The bat alone gives him an opportunity to make some kind of impact eventually in the big leagues. And with Banfield, it's everything except the bat. The big question is his hit tool. He does have the power. I mean, I've seen some nice moments of him hitting for power in his pro career, but in terms of actually getting on base, I mean, that's going to be the key, and being able to make contact with him. It's a joy to watch Banfield behind the plate defensively, and he's already shown that in a very small sample in the fall league, how he has an elite pop time. He has a major league ready pop time in terms of how quickly he gets rid of the ball, and he seems to really understands a lot of the fine art of catching and of working with pitchers. And I guess in that sense, maybe he as well has this certain floor where you feel like he'll eventually reach the highest level for some amount of time, but it's hard to see him sticking there until the bat picks up. It was around this time last year that there were a lot of hype from inside the Marlins coming in about him, about improvements that he was allegedly showing as a hitter based on his time at the alternate training site in 2020 and in instructs that they did right after that. It didn't translate during the regular season. He's certainly somebody to watch pretty closely over this next month in the fall league to see if he does have some of those nice moments. It's such a small sample just because he's not even like the top catcher out there. I'm not sure how many games we get. Maybe we get 10 or 11 more games of him over there, and hopefully he flashes something.
Yeah, no.
Yeah,
go ahead, Alex.
Just to bring it up, I mean, that's a guy, as Eli just said, that went to the alternate training site, did all that stuff, was facing off. And he said it himself in spring training, I got to face off against Sandy. I got to face off against Urania while he was here, and all these Pablo and all these other pitchers that were there. And I thought that really, really helped me. I think that's really going to, I specifically asked him in spring training, what's the next step with the bat? How do you improve with the bat? And he alluded it exactly to what I just said, in facing off against those upper level pitchers. And now he's facing off for a full season against single A pitching, mostly in a small park, which was Pullman Field. I guess the jury's still out on the new ABC Supply, which they opened in August, but for most of the season, he was playing in Pullman Field, which was a pretty small field, pretty easy place to hit. And for the full season, he hit 158 with a 280 on base percentage. So, I really hope he turns it around. I really hope he can. I think he will definitely be in spring training again next year to get the experience. He was there last year, or this past year, I should say. Didn't really do a lot. He was just there to get experience. I hope they bring him to spring training and let him get some at-bats, get some more reps. Every rep that guy gets is going to mean something. So I'm glad he's in Arizona. He's still 21, so there's still time. I mean, it's a high school catcher. It's very volatile, as we all know. And he's amazing behind the plate, as Eli said. So, yeah, if he could turn it around and even turn into like a 250 hitter, I mean, he could be a starter. But hitting 180 in single A advanced, you ain't going to be much more than a backup. So hopefully he can bridge that gap, because, man, his defense is special. But it's going to be tough for him to find based off of everything that's happened so far. But I hope he can prove every single one of us that naysays about him wrong, because he's special defensively.
That's a scary thing, because you mentioned he could be like a Jeff Mathis type guy, maybe a backup with his elite glove, and you say 250. That is just so far from realistic. It looks like now. I mean, who knows? You can have a great but unfortunately, like you said, at high A, you're hitting 180, slugging 308. That power's not even showing up. The defense looks good, but it's tough. Anyway, to end tonight, we're gonna start with Game 4 is tonight. Julio Urias is pitching for the Dodgers. He's gonna go up against Jesse Chavez. Inoa was scratched for Game 4 for the Braves. Braves are leading 2-1. The next 2 games are going to be in LA. So we're going to do our predictions for that one, since there's no Marlins baseball, unfortunately.
Yeah, there's a fun Marlins news nugget that came out of that, because Inoa got scratched on short notice, and they already took him off the roster, and they replaced him with Dylan Lee, who was a former Marlins draft pick who was in their system for 5 years. And they pretty surprisingly cut him at the end of spring training. He shoved at AAA this year, and they finally called him up to the majors at the end of the year. Kind of by default, now he's on the roster. So we got at least 2 more games in this series, and probably 3 or 4, if I was to guess. So we're going to see him pitch at some point. Maybe it's a low leverage situation, but
Right.
we're gonna see another former Marlin like get involved in this postseason.
That's another one that I think that makes it 9 in the league championship series alone. So, Daniel, who do you got winning tonight between LA and Atlanta?
Yeah, that's tough. I think, with Urias pitching, really is the game changer for the Dodgers. But
Yeah.
I would have, I think LA is going to take it. Coming off the bat, Cody Bellinger, I think he's going to go off, probably win NLCS MVP. And hopefully, maybe they do a little bit with Julio Urias like they did last time. Maybe they make him go in later in the innings, maybe around the third, fourth inning, and just maybe throw in a couple of guys. Maybe Alex Vezio gets to start, and then they put in Julio Urias. You never know. But I got the Dodgers winning tonight.
All right. Well, both of them being lefties, I don't know if they would do that. But yeah, no, Urias is the man, the 20-game winner. That guy's a stud. So for that reason, I think I'm going to go with you. Eli, your prediction.
Yeah, I'll end up in the same way, where I expect the Dodgers to not only win this game, but to somehow like turn around the series. And it's an amazing turn of events because if you just look at that single moment where going into the bottom of the 8th inning yesterday, down 2-0, trailing 5-2 in that game, like you look at the win probability, the Braves probably had like a 90% chance of winning that game and winning that series. And now at this moment, it really does look like a coin flip where you can't be too surprised if it goes one way or the other from here. I mean, the big key is exactly what you get out of these Dodgers bats, because they were just not scoring a whole lot of runs in this entire postseason until that exact rally in that inning against one of the Braves' better relievers. On paper, they seem like they should be a pretty good offense and that they should be able to have had more of those moments earlier in the series during those first 2 games they didn't have. And maybe we're proven wrong because playoff baseball is weird, but I think I think it's going to go a full 7 though. After the Dodgers win tonight, we're going to go all the way down to the wire, which these 2 teams did last year. And inevitably we're going to get the same results as last year, where I think the Dodgers pull it out in 7.
Yeah, I'm with you, Eli. I think just yesterday's game was a complete series shifter. Like you said, they were on the brink of being down 3-0, which history says you're not coming back from that unless you're the 0-4 Red Sox. Alex, your prediction for Game 4?
Yeah, no, I know getting scratched is huge. I mean, as Eli alluded to, the Dodgers offense has definitely played, I guess, second fiddle until that rally, as he alluded to. But man, the Braves offense has been really good. You see the coming out of Austin Riley, who's been really good throughout the playoffs. And then a guy that I thought the Marlins should have been in free agency, and Eddie Rosario, who was traded to the Braves from Cleveland, has been really good. So yeah, I mean, just looking at the pitching though, I mean, that the guy that the Braves were starting was, a bullpen guy the whole year. Now he's all of a sudden he's on the postseason roster and he's got to go try to start a game. So I think the Dodgers are going to be attacking early. I think they're going to get to him early, and I think the Dodgers offense is going to start to do what they should do. And I think they're definitely going to win this game, and I think eventually they'll win the series, but I think it'll be really good. I think at least 6 games, possibly 7. But I think it's going to be really entertaining. Hopefully Vezio has a good series too, because I love that guy. But yeah, I see the Dodgers winning the series.
Yeah, he's got 80 great stash, that's for sure. Anyway, so I guess it's unanimous. LA should win tonight. And that's the series I'm keeping an eye on for. I don't know if whoever's watching, Houston is up 7-1 on Boston in Game 5 of that series. And I think it's 70% of the teams that win Game 5 when the series is tied at 2 games apiece end up winning the whole thing. So that's something to keep an eye on for sure. And I think that wraps it up for this off-season special of Fish Stripes Live. For Alex, for Eli, for Daniel, for myself, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next week.
We'll send you out with some clips captured by our own Isaac Azut at fall development camp.
Victor Mesa getting an extra base hit for the first time in his career. Off a pitching machine. And Griffin Conine did not strike out today on the pitching machine, that's for sure.
And I think this is solid. That was Morissette, right?
That's Morissette, and that's one guy who I'm so high on, it's crazy.